The alarm on my wrist buzzed so hard it nearly cracked my skin. 3 credits left in my account, a landlord who wanted to space me out an airlock, and an auction hall full of aliens who looked at me like I was something they had scraped off their boot. That was the moment my life was supposed to end. Instead, it turned into something no one in this galaxy could explain. My name is Dallin Voss, and until that morning I was nobody. A scrapper. A man who crawled through dead ships for parts nobody else wanted, on a station so far from the center of galactic trade that even the tax collectors forgot we existed. Humanity was not hated in this part of space. We were worse than hated. We were ignored. A footnote species, tolerated because we were harmless, useless, and broke. The auction house on Kesrin Dock smelled like burnt wiring and old regret. Rows of alien bidders sat in curved chairs, sipping drinks that changed color with their moods, waiting for the good lots. Warships with working cores, mining rigs with intact drills, anything with value. I was there for the leftovers, the lot nobody wanted. The kind of junk that got sold at the very end of the night when everyone else had already gone home to spend their money on things that mattered. The auctioneer, a tall insectoid being with too many eyes and not enough patience, waved a clawed hand toward a floating holo display. Lot 271, unregistered hangar, contents unknown, non-refundable, sold as is, where is. Nobody moved. A few aliens actually laughed, the kind of laugh you give when something is so worthless it becomes funny. I raised my hand before I even understood what I was doing. 7 credits, I said. The room went quiet for exactly 1 second, and then the laughter came back louder. The auctioneer blinked twice, checked his data pad as if he had misheard me, and then shrugged in that universal way that meant why not. Sold. To the human. Just like that, for less money than a bowl of noodles back on the ration deck, I owned a hangar that not one single being in that room believed was worth touching. I walked out with the transfer chip in my pocket and a strange, tight feeling in my chest. Not excitement. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that felt like a warning I did not know how to listen to. The hangar sat in a dead zone of the station, a section abandoned so long ago that the environmental systems barely worked. My boots echoed against the metal floor as I walked down a corridor lit by half the lights that should have been there. Dust floated in the beams like snow that never landed. This was not a place people came to often. This was a place people forgot on purpose. The hangar door itself was massive, taller than 3 of me stacked together, made of a metal I did not recognize. No station markings, no manufacturer stamp, just rows of strange symbols etched into the surface. Symbols that looked burned in rather than printed, like whoever made this door wanted the warning to survive fire, time, and everything else. I ran my glove over one of the symbols and felt a small, cold shock travel up my arm. Not painful, just present. Like the door was telling me it noticed my hand. My scanner, a cheap second-hand model I bought off a market stall 3 years ago, beeped twice and then went silent. That never happened. It always gave me some kind of reading, even if it was garbage. This time, it just stopped, as if it had decided the situation was above its pay grade. I should have turned around right there. Any smart person would have. But smart people do not bid 7 credits on unknown lots at the end of a tired auction night, and I was never accused of being smart. I was accused of being desperate, which is a very different thing, and desperate people open doors that logic tells them to leave shut. The access panel beside the door still worked, barely. I pressed my thumb against it, using the ownership chip the auction house gave me, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then, with a groan that sounded less like machinery and more like something waking up after a very long sleep, the door split down the middle and slid apart. Dust poured out first, thick and gray, disturbed for what felt like centuries. Then came the smell. Metal, oil, and something else underneath it, something I could not name, sharp and clean like ozone after a storm. I stepped inside with my handheld light raised, and the beam swallowed itself in darkness so complete, it felt like the room was eating the light, rather than reflecting it. Then, slowly, ancient overhead lamps flickered to life one by one, revealing the shape in front of me. It was massive. A warship, easily 3 times the length of any hauler I had ever worked on, sat cradled in maglocks that looked like they had not released in a very long time. The hull was scarred, cracked in places, streaked with corrosion that told a story of decades or maybe centuries of neglect. Plates were missing near the front, exposing dark internal framework like broken ribs on a beast that had died standing up. By every measure I understood, this ship was junk, dead weight, scrap metal worth maybe enough to cover the 7 credits I paid and not much more. And yet, somewhere deep inside that broken hull, I heard it. A low hum, so quiet I almost mistook it for my own pulse in my ears. A hum that should not exist in a ship this dead. Power does not sit quietly in wreckage. Power either works or it does not. This felt like something in between, like a heartbeat slowed down to nearly nothing, waiting. I took a step closer, my boots crunching against loose debris, and the hum shifted in pitch, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. Then I heard something else, a sound that had nothing to do with old machinery settling or air pressure equalizing. A sound like breath, long, slow, deliberate breath, coming from somewhere in the shadows beneath the ship's belly. I froze. My light swept the darkness beneath the hull, searching, and for one terrible second I saw something move. Not a shape exactly. More like the absence of light taking on weight, sliding between support struts with a grace that did not belong to anything mechanical or anything alive that I had ever studied in a textbook. I am not ashamed to admit my hands shook. Any reasonable being would have run. I did think about running. I thought about it very seriously, but there was something else underneath the fear, something small and stubborn, the same thing that made me raise my hand for 7 credits when everyone else in that auction hall thought the lot was worthless. Curiosity, the kind that gets scrappers killed and occasionally gets them rich. "Hello," I said, and my voice sounded impossibly small in that huge dark space. The hum beneath the hull deepened, and for one long moment, nothing answered. Then, from the shadows, 2 points of pale light opened like eyes, and a presence I could not see fully turned to look directly at me. I did not run. I could not have told you why. My legs simply refused the order. I stood there, in a hangar I had bought for less money than a cheap meal, staring into darkness that stared back, and somewhere behind my ribs I understood, with total clarity, that my life had just changed in a way I could never undo. The lights above flickered once more, dimmer this time, as if the ship itself was holding its breath along with me. I want to tell you I had a plan in that moment. I did not. I had a light that was shaking in my grip, a scanner that had given up entirely, and a growing suspicion that the 7 credits I spent might turn out to be either the smartest or the last decision of my life. The shape beneath the hull shifted again, closer this time, and the temperature in the hangar seemed to drop by several degrees. My breath came out in a visible puff, and somewhere in the back of my mind, past all the fear, a single thought surfaced with startling calm. Whatever this was, it had been waiting a very long time, and now, for reasons I did not yet understand, it was waiting for me. I forced myself to take one more step forward, because standing still felt somehow more dangerous than moving, and the eyes in the darkness tracked the motion without blinking, without wavering, the way a predator watches something it has already decided it can catch whenever it wants. My light beam finally settled and held steady, illuminating just enough of the shape beneath the ship to tell me this was not an animal, not a machine in any way I recognized, and not anything friendly waiting to welcome its new owner home. It was something built to guard, and it had just noticed that someone had walked into its home for the first time in longer than I wanted to imagine. The silence stretched so long I started counting my own heartbeats just to have something to measure it by. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached 12, the presence beneath the hull had gone completely still, watching, deciding something about me that I was not part of and could not influence. Then, in a voice that came from everywhere in the hangar at once, low and rough like it had not been used in 100 years, it spoke. "Identify yourself." I nearly dropped my light. My mouth went dry, and for a moment I forgot every word of every language I had ever learned. Then, because silence felt more dangerous than answering, I found my voice. "Dallin," I said. "Dallin Voss. I bought this hangar." Another long pause. The pale eyes in the darkness narrowed slightly, and I felt, more than heard, something like disbelief ripple through that unseen presence. Bought, it repeated, the word coming out slow and strange, as if tasting something foreign. Yes, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice that I absolutely did not feel. 7 credits. It is registered under my name. I have the transfer chip if you need proof. The hum beneath the ship deepened again, vibrating through the floor and up into my boots, and for a moment I genuinely believed I had said something wrong, something that might end very badly for me. Instead, slowly, the shape beneath the hull began to move forward, out of the deepest shadow and into the dim light of the overhead lamps, and I finally saw, for the first time, exactly what had been guarding this ship since before I was born. It did not look like anything from my world, and it did not fully resemble the alien species I had grown used to seeing on the station either. It stood taller than any being I had met, its form built from something that looked like woven metal and shifting light, joints moving with unnatural smoothness, a presence that felt ancient in a way numbers could not measure. I had walked into that hangar expecting scrap metal. I had found something else entirely, something that looked at me now with eyes like dying stars, and asked a single question that I would spend the rest of my life trying to fully answer. Why have you come? I opened my mouth to answer, and that was the moment I understood, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened next in that hangar was going to change everything I thought I knew about myself, about my species, and about the ship sleeping silently above us both. I swallowed hard, forced my voice to stay level, and said the only true thing I had. I did not know what I was buying, I just knew I could not afford to walk away from it. For a long moment, the being said nothing. Then, in that same rough, ancient voice, it spoke words that settled into my chest like a stone dropping into still water. Then you are either very foolish, or you are exactly what this ship has been waiting for. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the narrow bunk of my rented pod, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that hangar in my mind, wondering what kind of world I had just stepped into, and whether 7 credits had bought me a fortune or a funeral. Either way, there was no going back now. The hangar was mine, the ship was mine, and whatever that guardian truly was, it had already decided, in its own slow and ancient way, that I was not leaving without answers. The next morning, I went back. The second time I walked into that hangar, I brought nothing with me but a flashlight and a stomach full of nerves. No weapon. No plan, just the strange pull that told me I had to go back, whether it made sense or not. The door recognized my thumbprint again and slid open without complaint, and this time the lights came on faster, brighter, as if the hangar itself had been expecting me and no longer needed to warm up slowly. The dust from the night before still hung faintly in the air, but the hum beneath the ship's hull was stronger now, steady, almost patient. I called out before I even reached the center of the room. I am here again. You said I was either foolish or exactly what this ship needed. I want to know which one it is. The Guardian emerged from beneath the hull without hesitation this time, moving with the same unnerving smoothness, its form catching the overhead light in strange shifting patterns like oil on water. It stopped a few paces from me and studied me the way a teacher studies a student who has just asked a very dangerous question. Perhaps both, it said. Foolishness and purpose are not always separate things. I ask its name, mostly to have something normal to hold on to in a conversation that felt anything but normal. It paused, as if the question itself was unfamiliar, and then answered with a designation rather than a name. Sentinel Unit 712, bound to this vessel since its construction. I decided right then that I was not calling it by a string of numbers. I asked if it minded being called something simpler, something with a little more life in it. After a pause long enough to make me wonder if I had offended it, it said a single word, Warden. From that moment forward, that was its name, Warden. I asked the obvious question next, the one that had kept me awake all night. What is this ship? Warden was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I started to think it would not answer at all. Then it spoke, slow and deliberate, choosing each word like it carried weight. This vessel predates the era your species currently remembers, it said. It was built during a time your kind does not speak of, a time your historians have either forgotten or were never permitted to record. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hangar's broken environmental controls. I told Warden that made no sense. Humanity barely had working ships a century ago. We were the newest species most of these aliens had ever met, tolerated because we were small and mostly harmless. There was no secret history. There was no forgotten era of powerful human warships. Warden's pale eyes studied me without blinking. That is what you have been told, it said. It is not the same as what is true. I pressed harder, asking how a warship this old could possibly belong to a species that supposedly did not have spaceflight capability more than 100 years ago. Warden's answer came slow, careful, like it was measuring how much a fragile mind could absorb at once. Your species did not begin its history a century ago, it said. It ended a chapter of it. There is a difference. What came before was sealed away, hidden, buried in dead hangars like this one, spread across forgotten corners of the galaxy, where no one thought to look for relics of a war your ancestors chose to erase from memory. I asked why anyone would erase something like that. Why bury the evidence of an entire era instead of simply ending the war and moving on? Warden's response settled over me like a weight I was not ready to carry. Because what your ancestors built during that era terrified enough of the galaxy that survival depended on convincing everyone, including themselves, that it no longer existed. I sat down right there on the cold floor of the hangar, because my legs did not feel steady enough to hold me standing while I processed that sentence. Warden waited, patient in a way that felt almost kind, giving me the space to absorb something that reshaped everything I thought I understood about my own species a place in this galaxy. I asked if that meant this ship, sitting broken and dusty above us, was once something powerful. Warden's answer came without hesitation this time. It was never broken, it said. It was hidden. There is a difference between decay and disguise. That single sentence changed the way I looked at the hull above me. What I had assumed was corrosion and neglect suddenly looked, in the dim light, less like damage and more like careful, deliberate concealment. Panels that seemed torn were, on closer look, seamed in ways that suggested they had been removed and placed back with purpose. Wiring that looked frayed carried a strange, faint shimmer beneath the surface grime, like something valuable wrapped in trash to keep thieves from noticing. I asked Warden the question that mattered most. Why was it still here? Why had this ship, hidden away for so long, not simply been destroyed if it was so dangerous? Warden's pale eyes dimmed slightly, and for the first time since I had met it, its voice carried something that sounded almost like old grief. Because destruction requires certainty that something will never be needed again, it said. Those who hid this vessel were not certain. They hoped for peace. They prepared for the possibility that peace would not last. I asked if peace had lasted. Warden did not answer right away. When it finally spoke, its voice was quieter than before. You tell me. You are the one who walked in from that world. I did not have a satisfying answer for that. I told Warden about the station outside, about the way humans were tolerated rather than respected, kept at arm's length by species who smiled thin smiles and traded with us only when it profited them. I told it about the quiet, constant reminder that our kind was seen as small, harmless, and unimportant in a galaxy full of far older and far more powerful civilizations. Warden listened without interrupting, and when I finished, it made a sound I can only describe as something between a sigh and a low mechanical hum, heavy with meaning I did not yet fully understand. Harmless, it repeated, almost to itself. That is precisely what they hoped everyone would believe. I asked what that meant, and Warden simply turned toward the ship above us, gesturing with something like a hand toward the scarred hull, the missing panels, the ancient hidden shape sleeping in the dark. It means your ancestors were very good at building weapons, and even better at hiding the fact that they had ever needed to. That single sentence sat heavy in my chest for the rest of the day. I left the hangar with more questions than I had walked in with, and a strange, growing suspicion that the 7 credits I spent had bought me far more than scrap metal and a talking machine. Over the following days, I returned again and again, each visit peeling back another layer of a history I had never been taught. Warden explained, piece by piece, that this ship was part of a fleet built during a period of conflict so severe that the survivors on all sides agreed, in the end, to erase it from shared memory, rather than risk it happening again. Ships like this one were not destroyed because destruction left evidence, and evidence invited questions. Instead, they were hidden, sealed, tucked into forgotten hangars across the edges of known space, guarded by sentinels like Warden, waiting for a very specific condition to be met before ever waking fully again. I asked what that condition was. Warden's answer came simply, plainly, in a way that made my chest tighten. A lawful heir of the builders, recognized by both blood and by claim, standing within these walls with intent to protect rather than to destroy. I told Warden that I was nobody, a scrapper, a man who barely afforded rent most months, let alone anything resembling the legacy of some ancient human war machine. Warden's pale eyes settled on me with something that felt, for the first time, almost gentle. Intent matters more than status, it said. You came back. Twice. Most who found ships like this one either fled and never returned, or came only for profit and were never recognized at all. I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over in my mind. I had not come back out of bravery. I had come back because I could not stop thinking about the hum beneath that hull, about the strange pull that told me there was something important sleeping above me, something that mattered. Warden seemed to read the uncertainty on my face, because it spoke again, its voice steady and sure in a way that settled something restless inside me. Ownership was never only about payment, Alan Voss. It was always about purpose. You have shown more of the second than most who have ever stood where you now stand. I did not fully understand, in that moment, exactly what I had agreed to simply by returning to that dusty, forgotten hangar again and again. I only knew that something ancient and enormous had begun paying attention to me, and that the quiet, sleepy life I had lived until now was already slipping away, replaced by something far larger and far more dangerous than I was prepared to face. Little did I know, word of a human buying an unregistered lot at Kesrin Dock's auction had already begun spreading through channels I had no access to and no awareness of, carried by whispers among traders who dealt in old war relics, collectors who specialized in forgotten conflicts, and factions who remembered, better than most, exactly what kind of ships used to hide in hangars just like mine. By the time I left the hangar that evening, satisfied and thoughtful, and far too distracted to notice the quiet clicking sound of a data terminal recording every transaction tied to lot 271, the wheels of something much larger than me had already begun turning. I walked home that night thinking about Warden's words, about hidden weapons and erased history, completely unaware that somewhere across the station, in offices and back rooms I had never seen, certain very interested parties were already asking questions about the human who had just bought something they believed no longer existed. 3 days after my last visit, I noticed I was being followed. It started small. A vendor near my usual noodle stall who suddenly had too many questions about where I lived. A maintenance worker who lingered too long near my rented pod, pretending to check a panel that had not needed checking in months. A pair of eyes across the transit platform that turned away just a little too quickly when I looked back. I told myself I was imagining it. Scrappers get paranoid. It comes with the job, always worried someone will steal a good find before you can sell it. But by the third day, when the same tall, grey-skinned trader appeared outside my pod entrance twice in one afternoon, wearing 2 different jackets, I knew paranoia had nothing to do with it. I went straight to the hangar. Warden was waiting near the entrance this time, its pale eyes already fixed on the door before I even reached it, as if it had sensed my unease from somewhere deep within its ancient systems. "You are being watched," it said, before I could speak a single word. I told it I suspected the same thing, and asked how it already knew. Warden's answer came simply, almost matter-of-fact. "The moment you registered ownership of this hangar under your name, that registration became visible to anyone with sufficient access to dock records. There are those in this galaxy who monitor such records specifically for ships like this one." I asked who exactly would care about a broken old hangar and a pile of scrap metal enough to send people to watch my home. Warden was quiet for a long moment, and when it finally answered, its voice carried a weight I had not heard from it before. Not everyone believes this ship is scrap, it said. Some remember exactly what vessels like this one were capable of, and some have spent generations hoping none of them would ever wake again. That sent a cold shiver down my spine. I asked if that meant we were in danger. Warden did not soften the answer. Yes, it said simply, and it will grow worse the longer this ship remains only partially concealed. I asked what it meant by partially concealed, and Warden explained, patiently, that a ship like this one gave off subtle energy signatures even in its dormant state, signatures that grew slightly stronger each time systems activated, even briefly, such as the lights that came on whenever I entered. Every visit I made, every moment the hangar's systems responded to my presence, sent out small ripples that a sufficiently sensitive scanner could detect from surprising distances. In simple terms, my curiosity had been slowly waking something the galaxy had worked very hard to keep asleep, and certain parties had already noticed. I asked Warden what we should do. They considered the question for a long moment before answering. We can continue as we have, cautiously, and hope those watching remain simply curious rather than concerned. Or we can accelerate the process, wake more of this vessel's systems deliberately, and prepare properly for what may come, rather than reacting only when danger arrives. I did not like either option, but sitting still and hoping for the best had never once worked out well for me in my entire life as a scrapper, so I asked Warden to show me what waking more of the ship would actually involve. It led me deeper into the hangar than I had ever gone before, past the main hull and down a narrow access corridor hidden behind a section of wall I had assumed was simply structural support. The corridor opened into a chamber unlike anything I had seen, lined with dormant control stations, dust-covered seats, and a massive central console that pulsed faintly with the same slow hum I had first heard the night I bought this hangar. "This is the command deck," Warden explained. "From here, a recognized owner may begin reactivating core systems gradually, without triggering the more aggressive signatures associated with full activation." I asked what recognized owner actually meant in practical terms, since I still did not understand exactly why Warden had accepted me so readily when I clearly had no idea what I was doing. Warden's answer came slowly, thoughtfully. Recognition is partly genetic, tied to markers embedded in this ship's original construction, and partly behavioral, tied to intention and conduct. You carry enough of both to be accepted, though your full potential as this vessel's rightful commander remains unproven. That last part stung slightly, but I understood the honesty behind it. I had not proven anything yet beyond curiosity and stubbornness. Whatever came next would require considerably more than that. I placed my hand, at Warden's instruction, against a smooth panel embedded in the console. It felt warm beneath my palm, warmer than metal should feel in a room this cold, and for a brief moment I felt something like a pulse travel up through my arm, quick and strange, gone before I could fully process it. The console flickered to life, slowly, revealing a soft blue glow beneath layers of dust, displaying symbols I did not recognize, arranged in patterns that somehow still felt oddly familiar, like language half remembered from a dream. Warden explained that this activation, while limited, would strengthen the ship's presence just enough to reinforce basic defensive protocols without fully revealing its true capabilities to outside sensors, enough to protect ourselves if trouble arrived, but not so much that it would announce exactly what kind of ship this truly was to everyone watching. I asked how much protection we were talking about. Warden's answer, delivered in that same calm, steady voice, gave me a strange mixture of relief and fear all at once. Enough that anyone attempting to seize this ship by force will regret the attempt considerably. We spent the following hours working through basic systems together, Warden guiding my hands across old controls, explaining functions I barely understood, patiently correcting mistakes I made more times than I would like to admit. Slowly, piece by piece, dormant lights along the command deck flickered on, filling the once dark chamber with a soft glow that felt, for the first time since I had bought this hangar, less like standing in a tomb and more like standing in something that might still, somehow, come back to life. By the time I finally left that night, exhausted but strangely energized, Warden gave me a warning I carried with me the entire walk home. "They will come soon," it said. "Those who watch will not remain content with watching for much longer." I asked how soon meant. Warden's pale eyes dimmed slightly, the closest thing I had seen to genuine concern from it since we had met. Days at most, perhaps less. I barely slept that night, replaying every warning Warden had given me, running through everything I had learned about hidden ships, erased wars, and factions who remembered exactly what my species used to be capable of. I told myself I would be ready when trouble came. I had no real idea, at that point, exactly how wrong I was about what ready would actually require. The very next morning, as I walked the narrow corridor toward the hangar entrance, I noticed 3 figures standing near the door that had not been there the day before, wearing uniforms I recognized instantly from patrol vessels that occasionally passed through Kesrin Dock, station enforcement. Armed, official, and very clearly waiting for me. The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered alien with plated skin and cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward the moment he saw me approaching. "Dallin Voss," he said, his voice carrying an authority meant to make ordinary people freeze in place. "We need to discuss the contents of Lot 271. I felt my stomach drop, understanding immediately, with painful clarity, that whatever quiet window of time I had imagined I still possessed had just run out far sooner than Warden had predicted. I stood there in the narrow corridor, 3 armed enforcement officers blocking the path between me and the only door in this entire station that mattered anymore, and tried very hard not to let my voice shake when I answered. I asked what exactly they wanted to discuss. The broad-shouldered officer, whose name tag read Commander Threllick, studied me with the kind of patience that felt entirely artificial, the sort officials use right before they stop being patient at all. "Unusual energy readings have been detected originating from this section of the station," he said. "Readings inconsistent with an unregistered scrap lot. We are here to inspect the property you purchased 3 days ago." I told him, as calmly as I could manage, that I had simply been cleaning up an old ship I intended to sell for parts, and that any odd readings were probably just faulty old equipment finally sparking back to life after years of neglect. It was a weak excuse, and from the look on Threllick's face, he knew it too. He informed me that station regulations permitted inspection of any lot suspected of containing hazardous or unregistered military technology, regardless of private ownership, and that I could either allow them access voluntarily or face formal seizure proceedings that would strip my ownership entirely within the hour. I felt panic rising in my chest, because I understood, with sudden clarity, exactly what would happen the moment these officers stepped past that door, and Warden decided they were a threat, rather than simply annoying bureaucrats doing their job. I had seen glimpses of what Warden was capable of, in quiet moments of conversation. I did not want to imagine what it looked like when actually provoked. I asked for a moment to consider, hoping for any small window of time to think of something, anything, that might prevent this situation from turning into something none of us could walk away from. Threllick's patience, thin as it already was, ran out entirely. He nodded to the 2 officers beside him, and they moved toward the door's access panel without waiting for my permission. I called out, telling them to wait, but it was already too late. The moment one of the officers placed an unauthorized hand against the panel, the door's ancient locking mechanisms triggered a defense protocol Warden had activated the night before, and every light in that corridor plunged instantly into total darkness. For one terrifying, silent second, nothing happened at all. Then Warden's voice filled the corridor from everywhere and nowhere at once, low, resonant, and utterly without warmth. "Unauthorized access detected." The officers froze, weapons raised uselessly toward darkness they could not properly aim into, and I heard Threllick shouting orders that nobody around him seemed capable of following, because whatever Warden had triggered had clearly disabled far more than just the lights. I shouted into the darkness, telling Warden these were station officials, not attackers, hoping desperately that distinction would matter. There was a pause, brief but agonizing, before Warden's voice answered, quieter this time, directed only toward me. Your intention determines my response, Dalin Voss. Do you wish them harmed, or simply removed? I told it, as firmly as my shaking voice allowed, that nobody needed to be harmed. Just make them leave, please. Another pause. Then, gradually, the corridor lights flickered back to a dim glow, revealing 3 officers standing frozen in place, weapons lowered not by choice, but because some invisible force had gently and firmly guided their arms downward, their expressions caught somewhere between confusion and genuine fear. Thrilik, to his credit, recovered his composure faster than his subordinates. He looked directly at the closed hangar door, then back at me, his cold eyes narrowing with something that looked uncomfortably close to recognition. That is not scrap metal in there, he said quietly, no longer bothering with official bureaucratic tone. I did not answer, because there was nothing safe left to say. Threlik studied me a moment longer, glanced once more at the door, and then, to my genuine surprise, ordered his officers to stand down and withdraw from the area entirely. Before leaving, he turned back toward me one final time, his voice low enough that only I could hear it clearly. I am filing this as a false alarm, he said, but others are watching this lot far more closely than station enforcement ever could. What just happened here will not stay quiet for long. You should prepare yourself, human. Whatever is behind that door, plenty of dangerous people already suspect exactly what it might be. He left without another word, his officers following quickly behind him, clearly eager to put distance between themselves and whatever unseen force had just gently but firmly handled them without a single shot being fired. I stood alone in that corridor for a long time after they disappeared, my heart pounding, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. When I finally found the courage to open the hangar door and step back inside, Warden was waiting near the entrance, exactly as before, its pale eyes studying me with something that almost resembled approval. You showed restraint, it said. That matters more than you understand. I asked what would have happened if I had told it to harm them instead. Warden's answer came without hesitation, and without any hint of the mercy it had just shown moments earlier. They would not have survived the encounter. That sentence settled into my chest like a stone, cold and heavy, reminding me exactly what kind of power now recognized me as its owner, and exactly how easily that power could be turned toward violence with nothing more than a careless word from me. I asked Warden if incidents like today would keep happening. It did not soften its answer. Yes, and each one will grow more serious than the last. Word has already begun spreading beyond simple curiosity. Those who fear what your species once was will not stop investigating until they either confirm their fears or eliminate the possibility entirely. I asked what our options were going forward. Warden considered the question carefully before responding. We continue preparing this vessel for genuine activation, it said. Partial measures will only delay the inevitable. If conflict is coming regardless of caution, then readiness becomes far more valuable than secrecy. I did not love the sound of that, but I understood the logic behind it. Hiding quietly had already failed within days of my first visit. Pretending everything was fine had nearly gotten 3 officers hurt or worse over a simple misunderstanding. If people were determined to keep investigating regardless of what I did, then perhaps the smartest path forward was ensuring that whatever they eventually found was something they would think twice about provoking. Over the following 2 days, Warden and I worked tirelessly through the ship's dormant systems, activating one section after another under careful, deliberate control, designed to strengthen our defenses without fully revealing the vessel's true capabilities all at once. I learned more about ancient human engineering in those 2 days than I had learned about my own species' history in my entire life up to that point, and every lesson left me with a strange, growing sense of pride mixed uncomfortably with dread. Warden explained, during a quiet moment between system checks, that this particular vessel had been built during what it called the Long Silence, a period when human engineers, faced with existential threats from far larger galactic powers, had developed technology specifically designed to make a numerically small, technologically disadvantaged species capable of standing against far greater forces. Every system I unlocked told a story of desperation transformed into innovation, fear reshaped into strength. I asked Warden, during one of these lessons, whether humanity had ultimately won whatever conflict this ship had been built for. Its answer, delivered with the same careful weight it gave to every important truth, left me with more questions than comfort. Your species survived, it said. Whether that constitutes winning depends entirely on what price was paid to achieve it, a price your current generation has never been told. I did not get the chance to ask what that price was, because at that exact moment, every light in the hangar dimmed sharply, and an alert I did not recognize blared from the command deck's console, sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Warden's posture shifted instantly, its pale eyes flaring brighter, its entire presence sharpening into something far more alert than I had seen from it since our very first meeting. Multiple armed vessels approaching this station's docking coordinates, it said, its voice flat and controlled, despite the clear urgency behind the words. Unregistered, heavily armed. Their trajectory suggests direct interest in this hangar specifically, I asked, my voice barely steady. Exactly who would send armed ships after a rusted old hangar bought for 7 credits? Warden's answer came without hesitation, cold and certain in a way that told me our brief period of careful preparation had just run entirely out of time. Those who no longer wish to investigate quietly, it said, those who have decided, instead, to simply take what they fear before it can fully awaken. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the console, watching unfamiliar symbols flash faster and faster, each pulse representing another ship drawing closer to the very hangar I stood inside. Perhaps less, depending on how aggressively they choose to approach. I asked what our options were. Warden turned toward me fully, its pale eyes steady despite the chaos building around us. We fortify what has already been activated, and we prepare to defend what is ours, it said. Retreat is no longer a realistic possibility. This hangar has only one entrance, and they already know precisely where to find it. I felt fear coiling tight in my stomach, but beneath it, strangely, I also felt something else, something that surprised me, a stubborn refusal to simply hand over what little I had managed to build in the span of a few short, impossible days. I told Warden to do whatever was necessary to protect the ship, and to protect us. It studied me for a brief moment, as if weighing the full weight of that permission, before nodding once and turning back toward the console with sudden, decisive purpose. Lights across the command deck surged brighter, and beneath my feet, I felt the entire ship shudder gently, like something enormous stretching muscles it had not used in a very long time. Ancient systems, dormant for who knew how many decades, began humming to life around us, filling the chamber with a low, powerful vibration that I felt more in my chest than in my ears. Warden explained quickly, as the sound of approaching engines grew audible even through the thick hangar walls, that the vessel's outer hull, though appearing damaged, contained layered plating far tougher than its worn exterior suggested, and that several defensive systems, though old, remained fully functional once properly reactivated. I asked if that meant we could actually survive an armed assault. Warden's answer, delivered with calm, unshaken confidence, gave me the first real flicker of hope I had felt since the alert first sounded. Survival was never truly in question, it said. The only uncertain factor is how much of this vessel's true nature we allow the attackers to witness before this ends. Before I could ask what it meant by that, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the hangar's outer walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of docking clamps forcing themselves into place against metal that had not welcomed visitors in longer than most living beings could remember. They had arrived. Warden moved toward the command deck's main view screen, gesturing for me to follow, and together we watched as external sensors, now fully active for the first time in decades, displayed a clear image of 3 heavily armed vessels, locked against our hangar's outer hull, their boarding ramps already extending toward a secondary access point I had not even known existed until that very moment. I asked Warden who these attackers actually were. It studied the sensor feed carefully before answering, its voice tightening slightly with something that sounded almost like old, weary recognition. Mercenaries, it said, employed by a faction that has spent generations specifically searching for vessels like this one, hoping to either destroy them quietly or sell their remains to whichever galactic power pays the highest price for proof that your species once possessed weapons capable of shifting the balance of power. I felt cold understanding settle over me. These were not curious officials doing their job, and they were not simply greedy scavengers hoping for an easy score. These were people who understood exactly what kind of ship sat inside this hangar, and who intended to make sure it either belonged to them or belonged to no one at all. Warden turned to me, its pale eyes steady and calm, despite the chaos closing in around us. "Stay behind the command console," it instructed. "Whatever happens next, allow me to handle the initial engagement. Your survival matters more than proving anything to those who have come seeking a fight." I wanted to argue, some foolish instinct telling me I should stand and face this threat directly, rather than hide behind ancient machinery while Warden did all the work, but the sound of forced entry echoing from the secondary access point reminded me quickly that bravery without preparation was simply another word for a mistake. I ducked behind the console just as the first group of armed mercenaries broke through the access point, weapons raised, moving with the practiced precision of soldiers who had clearly done this exact kind of raid many times before. Then Warden moved. I have never, before or since that moment, witnessed anything move the way Warden moved through that hangar. It did not simply walk toward the intruders. It seemed to become distance itself, closing the gap between itself and the first mercenary before the soldier had even finished raising his weapon fully. There was no violence in the way most people imagine violence, no dramatic explosions, no scattered debris. Warden simply reached the first mercenary, and the soldier's weapon fell from suddenly limp fingers as he collapsed, unconscious, without ever firing a single shot. The mercenaries behind him, trained enough to recognize a threat when they saw one, immediately opened fire, a hail of energy bolts streaking toward Warden's form. Every single shot passed through empty space where Warden had been standing only a heartbeat earlier, as if it had simply chosen not to be present for the attack at all. I watched, frozen behind the console, as Warden moved through that group of armed soldiers like something not entirely bound by the same rules of physics the rest of us lived by, disabling each mercenary in turn with quick, precise, almost gentle motions that left them unconscious rather than dead, despite clearly possessing the capability to end each encounter far more permanently. Within moments, the entire first wave of attackers lay scattered across the hangar floor, disarmed and unconscious, and an eerie silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's newly awakened systems. I stepped out from behind the console, my legs shaking slightly, staring at Warden as it turned back toward me, its pale eyes calm and unreadable. I asked why it had not simply killed them, given how easily it clearly could have. Warden's answer came steady and certain. "Because you asked me to protect, not to destroy," it said, "and because mercy, when properly applied, often sends a clearer message than violence ever could." Before I could respond, external sensors flared again, sharper this time, revealing something far more concerning than the mercenaries who now lay defeated on the hangar floor. A larger vessel, considerably more heavily armed than the three that had already attempted boarding, had begun approaching the station directly, its weapon systems clearly active and aimed squarely at our position. Warden's expression, or whatever passed for expression on a being built from light and shifting metal, hardened instantly. "That is not a mercenary vessel," it said quietly. "That signature belongs to a military-grade cruiser, considerably more dangerous than anything we have faced so far tonight." I asked, my voice barely steady, if we could survive an attack from something like that. Warden turned toward me, its pale eyes flaring with something that felt, for the very first time since I had met it, uncomfortably close to genuine concern. "This vessel remains only partially awakened," it said. "Facing a threat of that magnitude will require activating far more of its true capabilities than we have dared to unlock so far, capabilities that, once revealed, cannot ever be quietly hidden again." I understood, in that moment, standing in a hangar I had bought for 7 credits, surrounded by unconscious mercenaries, and facing the approach of a warship clearly intent on ending this confrontation with considerably more force, that whatever quiet, careful path Warden and I had been walking together had just run out of room entirely. I asked Warden directly whether it was ready to fully wake this ship, consequences and all. Its answer came without hesitation, steady, certain, and carrying the weight of decades of patient waiting finally reaching its end. I have been ready since the moment you walked through that door, Dalin Voss. The only question remaining is whether you are ready as well. I looked at the approaching cruiser on the view screen, felt the ancient ship humming to life beneath my feet, and made the only decision that felt possible in that moment. Wake it, I said, all of it. The moment I gave the order, the entire hangar changed around me. Lights that had flickered dim and uncertain for days suddenly blazed to full brightness, revealing details in the ship's hull I had never noticed before, seams and panels shifting subtly as ancient systems began drawing power from sources I did not fully understand and could not begin to name. The low hum that had followed me since my very first visit deepened into something powerful, resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the metal floor and up into my very bones. Warden moved quickly toward the command console, its hands, if they could be called that, moving across ancient controls with practiced precision built from decades, maybe centuries, of patient waiting for exactly this moment. Full activation sequence initiated, it announced, its voice carrying an intensity I had not heard from it before. Prepare yourself. What comes next will not be subtle. I asked what that meant exactly, and Warden did not have time to answer before the entire hangar shuddered violently, the massive warship above us groaning as ancient maglocks released their decades-long grip, allowing the vessel's true bulk to settle fully onto reinforced deck supports built specifically to bear its weight. Through the reinforced viewport built into the command deck, I watched as external hull plating that had appeared corroded and damaged suddenly shifted, panels sliding smoothly into new configurations, revealing sleek, dark armor beneath the disguise that had fooled every appraiser, every scrapper, and every curious alien who had ever glanced at this vessel and dismissed it as worthless junk. This was no longer scrap metal. Weapon emplacements I had not even known existed emerged from concealed housings along the hull, humming with barely contained energy. Engine ports that had appeared dead and corroded flared to life with a deep blue glow that lit up the entire hangar. The ship that had sat silent and broken for who knew how many decades was, piece by piece, system by system, becoming exactly what it had always truly been. A weapon built to end wars, not merely survive them. Warden turned to me, its pale eyes brighter than I had ever seen them, and spoke with an urgency that cut through my growing awe. The approaching cruiser has detected our activation, it said. They are altering course, moving to engage directly rather than allowing boarding parties to attempt entry again. I asked what we needed to do. Warden's answer came swift and certain. You must take the command chair, it said, gesturing toward a seat at the heart of the console I had not previously noticed, its surface humming faintly with the same energy pulsing through the rest of the ship. This vessel requires a recognized commander present at the moment of full engagement. Without you, I can only defend. With you, we can decide the outcome. My hands shook as I stepped toward that chair, every instinct screaming that I was nowhere near ready for whatever sitting in it might require of me. But behind me, scattered unconscious mercenaries and the looming threat of an approaching military cruiser reminded me clearly that readiness was a luxury I no longer had time to wait for. I sat down, and the moment my body settled into that ancient seat, something shifted inside me, a strange, electric awareness spreading outward from where my hands rested against smooth control surfaces, as if the ship itself was reaching out to recognize something buried deep within me that I had never known was there. Images flickered briefly across my vision, quick and disorienting, glimpses of things I did not fully understand, faces I did not recognize, battles fought long before I was born, a voice, distant and fading, speaking words in a language that felt strangely familiar, despite being completely foreign. Then, as quickly as it came, the sensation passed, leaving me gripping the arms of that chair, breathing hard, staring at a display that now responded instantly and precisely to my every intention, as if the ship and I had somehow, impossibly, become connected in ways I could not fully explain. Warden's voice, steady and calm despite the chaos building outside, cut through my disorientation. "Command link established," it said. "This vessel now recognizes you fully. We are ready." Through the viewport, the approaching military cruiser grew larger, its weapon systems clearly visible now, charging with a menacing orange glow that promised considerable destruction if allowed to fire freely. I asked Warden what our next move should be. Its answer came without hesitation. "Trust the ship and trust yourself. I will guide you, but the decisions from this point forward belong to you." I took a steadying breath, forced my racing thoughts into something resembling order, and reached out with instructions I somehow understood, despite never having commanded anything more complex than a cargo hauler in my entire life. The ship responded instantly, engines flaring brighter, systems aligning with an efficiency that felt less like operating a machine and more like moving my own limbs. The cruiser fired first, a devastating volley of energy weapons streaking directly toward our hull. Zabelis instinctively, expecting impact and damage, but our ship's newly awakened defensive systems responded before I had even fully processed the threat, shifting angled plating to deflect the worst of the assault, absorbing the remaining impact with barely a shudder through the hull. Warden's voice carried something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "Their weapons were designed to destroy scrap metal and forgotten relics," it said. "They were not designed to face something fully awake." I asked if we should return fire, and Warden reminded me gently that the choice remained entirely mine to make. I thought about the mercenaries lying unconscious rather than dead on our hangar floor, about the mercy Warden had shown even while facing armed aggression, and I made my decision quickly, certain in a way that surprised even myself. "Target their weapon systems only," I said. "Disable them, nothing more." Warden did not question the order. Instead, it guided my instincts smoothly through targeting systems I somehow understood, despite never having trained for any of this, and our ship's own weapon emplacements, ancient but far from obsolete, fired a precise, controlled burst directly toward the cruiser's primary weapon array. The impact was immediate and decisive. The cruiser's weapons flared briefly, sparked violently, and then went dark entirely, leaving the massive vessel drifting, disarmed, and clearly no longer capable of continuing its attack. A tense silence followed, broken only by the steady hum of our own systems and the distant sound of alarms blaring uselessly aboard the now defenseless cruiser. Then, unexpectedly, a communication channel opened, crackling briefly before a shaken, unfamiliar voice filled the command deck. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Oren Voss of the cruiser Ashgard. We surrender. Please, do not fire again." The name Voss, so close to my own, struck me with strange, unexpected weight, though I had no time to dwell on coincidence with everything else unfolding around me. I responded, my voice steadier than I felt, informing them that we had no intention of further engagement, provided they withdrew immediately and abandoned any future interest in this hangar or its contents. There was a brief pause before the shaken captain agreed without hesitation, his cruiser already beginning a slow, clearly reluctant retreat away from the station. As the threat withdrew, Warden turned toward me, its pale eyes studying me with something that felt distinctly like quiet approval. "You showed restraint even in victory," it said. "That decision alone speaks louder about your worth as this vessel's commander than any battle ever could." I sank back into the command chair, exhausted, adrenaline slowly draining from my system, replaced by a strange mixture of disbelief and something I had never truly felt before in my entire life. Purpose. Real purpose, heavier and more real than anything I had ever known as a broke, forgotten scrapper on the edge of a galaxy that had spent my entire life ignoring me. I asked Warden what would happen now, with word of a fully awakened human warship already certain to spread far beyond this single encounter. Its answer, delivered with calm, patient certainty, settled over me with the full weight of everything that had happened since I foolishly raised my hand at that auction for 7 measly credits. Now, Dallin Voss, the galaxy learns that what it buried was never truly gone. And it must decide, quickly, exactly how it intends to respond to that truth. News travels strangely, In a galaxy built from 1,000 different species, 1,000 different languages, and 1,000 different networks that rarely agree on anything except when something genuinely frightens all of them at once. Within a single day of that disabled cruiser limping away from Kesrin Dock, word of what had happened in my forgotten little hangar had already reached corners of known space I had never even heard of. I learned this the hard way, sitting quietly in the command chair while Warden monitored incoming signals from across dozens of different channels, each one carrying fragments of the same growing story, twisted and exaggerated with every retelling, yet somehow never quite managing to overstate the truth of what had actually happened. A human warship, thought extinct for generations, had fully awakened. Its guardian had disabled an armed mercenary assault without a single fatality. A military cruiser sent to seize or destroy it had instead been forced into a humiliating retreat, disarmed by a vessel everyone had assumed was nothing more than forgotten scrap. I asked Warden how bad the fallout would be. It considered the question carefully before answering, its voice steady despite the magnitude of what we now faced together. Reactions will vary widely, it said. Some will react with fear, believing your species intends to reclaim old power through old weapons. Others will react with curiosity, wondering what else might remain hidden across forgotten corners of this galaxy. A smaller number, cautious and wise, will simply wait to see what you choose to do next before deciding how to respond themselves. I asked what Warden believed I should do next. For the first time since we had met, it did not offer an immediate answer, choosing instead to let the question sit between us, patient and unhurried. Finally, it spoke, its voice carrying a weight that told me exactly how important this moment truly was. That choice belongs entirely to you, Dallin Voss. This vessel was built to protect, not to conquer. Whether it becomes a symbol of renewed fear or renewed respect depends entirely on how its new commander chooses to wield it. I sat with that thought for a long while, staring out at the quiet, dim hangar that had somehow, in the span of barely a week, transformed from a forgotten dead end into the center of an entire galaxy's growing attention. I thought about every alien who had ever looked at me and other humans with quiet, dismissive pity. I thought about Threlic's warning, about mercenaries sent to seize what they feared, about a captain named Voss who had surrendered rather than risk destruction facing a power he clearly recognized as far beyond his own. I understood, sitting there in that command chair built for someone far greater than a broke scrapper who had bid 7 credits on a whim, that I now held something capable of either terrifying this galaxy into renewed conflict or proving, quietly and firmly, that strength did not always have to mean aggression. I made my decision. I asked Warden to help me record a message, one that would reach every channel currently buzzing with rumors and fear about what had happened here. Warden studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, activating recording systems across the command deck. I spoke plainly, without exaggeration, without threats. I explained that this ship had been discovered, not sought out with any intention of conquest, that it had defended itself and its owner only when directly attacked, and that its capabilities existed now for protection, not aggression. I made clear that no further conflict would come from this hangar unless conflict was brought to it first. It was not a grand speech. It was not filled with promises of glory or dominance. It was simply honest, delivered by someone who understood, better than most, exactly how quickly fear could spiral into violence if left unaddressed. Warden transmitted the message across every channel currently discussing our encounter, and then, together, we waited. The response, when it finally came, surprised me more than anything else that had happened over the past several days combined. Rather than immediate outrage or renewed aggression, most channels fell into a strange, cautious quiet, digesting a message that offered restraint rather than threats, protection rather than domination. A few voices, predictably, called for immediate action against what they viewed as an unacceptable resurgence of dangerous human technology. But far more voices, surprisingly, expressed something closer to grudging curiosity, wondering aloud whether perhaps humanity's forgotten history deserved a second, more careful look rather than immediate, fearful condemnation. I asked Warden what this meant for the days and years ahead. It considered the question with the same careful thoughtfulness it had shown from our very first conversation. It means, Dalin Vos, that the galaxy's nightmare has indeed begun, exactly as the old warnings once predicted. But nightmares are not always destruction. Sometimes they are simply the uncomfortable, necessary process of remembering truths that were buried out of fear rather than wisdom. I thought about that for a long time, sitting quietly in that command chair, surrounded by a ship that had slept in darkness for longer than most civilizations could properly measure, waiting patiently for someone, anyone, willing to wake it with purpose rather than greed. I had walked into that auction house believing I was simply bidding on a worthless lot of forgotten junk, desperate enough to gamble 7 credits I could barely afford to lose. Instead, I had found something far larger than myself, a piece of history my own species had never been permitted to remember, guarded faithfully by a being who had waited, alone in the dark, for exactly the kind of person willing to return not once, but again and again, driven by curiosity rather than fear. I did not know, sitting there in that quiet, humming command deck, exactly what challenges waited ahead in the days and months to come. I did not know how many factions would eventually demand answers, how many old fears would need addressing, how many careful conversations would be required to prevent this discovery from spiraling into exactly the kind of conflict everyone, including myself, desperately hoped to avoid. But I understood, with absolute clarity, that whatever came next, I would not be facing it alone. Warden turned toward me one final time that night, its pale eyes calm and steady, carrying the quiet patience of something that had waited an impossibly long time for this exact moment to finally arrive. Whatever this galaxy chooses to call what has begun here, it said, know that you did not create this nightmare, Dalin Vos. You simply woke something that was always waiting, patiently, for someone brave enough and human enough to remember it. I looked out at the ship surrounding us, fully awake now after decades of careful, patient concealment, and understood, finally, exactly what those 7 credits had truly purchased. Not junk, not scrap metal, a beginning. And somewhere across a galaxy that had spent generations convincing itself humanity's ghosts were safely buried and gone forever, word continued spreading quietly between frightened, curious, and cautious voices alike, carrying a single unavoidable truth that would echo far beyond this small, forgotten station for a very long time to come. Humanity's sleeping nightmares had never truly died. They had simply been waiting for someone willing to knock on the door.